guys! What's up? Alpha Lion Simba here, and welcome to a new mini-series on my channel. Like I said, inspired by Wicked Binge, I'm going to be doing my own take on sentencing the Disney villains for their crimes. Like Wicked Binge, I'm mostly doing this just for fun, and this doesn't necessarily correlate to the courts in real life. But anyway, the concept, like with Wicked Binge, is going to be pretending that each Disney villain survived their respective film and can stand trial for their crimes. And this has nothing to do with the role play I do with your Animated 18. Like I said, it's all in just good fun. And so therefore, I am your judge, jury, and executioner. So, court is now officially in session. Let's begin with the film that started it all, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Magic mirror on the wall, which villain gets the harshest punishment of them all? Starting with the Huntsman. Now, he has a very small role in the film, but he does have a few crimes under his belt. First up, he is sent by the evil queen to kill Snow White, which slaps him a charge of aiding and abetting. Then we see him about to pull a knife on Snow, which gets him the charge of attempted murder. However, in light of the fact that he couldn't actually bring it to himself to fully go with it, and the fact that he helped Snow escape, his sentence is reduced to just 7 years in prison. Up next is the main villain of Snow White, the evil queen, or as I prefer to call her, Queen Regina. She may be a monarch, but I'm not letting her off the hook. Her first charge comes when she threatens to execute the Huntsman if he fails to kill Snow White.
The penalty if you fail.
This gets Regina her first charge, death threats. Later, she turns herself into an old hag, passing herself off as a peddler woman, which gets her a charge of identity fraud. Later, she poisons Snow White with the poison apple, which can be counted as murder. And during the climax, she tries to crush the dwarfs with a giant boulder, getting her a charge of attempted murder. And so, Regina's sentence is the death penalty. But instead of her fate from the actual movie or any forms of medieval execution, I'm giving her her fate from the original fairy tale, where she attends the wedding of Snow White and the prince, but is forced to wear red-hot iron shoes and dance in them until she drops dead. One might argue that that's kinda overkill, but still, all these charges prove that Regina is too dangerous to be allowed to live. Our next film in the docket is Pinocchio. So, let's figure out what villains get when you wish upon a star. We're starting with Honest John and Gideon, the infamous con artists of Pinocchio's village. Based off a small scene we see between Gideon and Pinocchio, they are charged with attempted petty theft. And twice in the film, they trick Pinocchio into going with them. Once when they trick him into going to Stromboli's, and later to Pleasure Island. They get 2 counts of kidnapping for that. True, Pinocchio does go with them voluntarily, but he's a minor and therefore cannot legally consent. Later on in the film, they agree to help the Coachman with getting boys for Pleasure Island, slapping them a charge of aiding and abetting. Then, while they're duping Pinocchio into going to Pleasure Island, Honest John will be charged with impersonating a doctor, as he most certainly does not have a medical license. With that, I sentence Honest John and Gideon to 13 years in prison. Our next Pinocchio villain to stand trial is Stromboli, the puppet master. Now, he may have been introduced as a jolly man that does have somewhat of a temper, but don't let that facade fool you. His first charge is kidnapping when he threw Pinocchio in the birdcage. Shortly after doing so, he threatens to chop Pinocchio into firewood either when he doesn't do as he's told or when he's outlived his usefulness.
You are growing too old. You will make good firewood.
So that's a charge of death threats. With all that in mind, I sentence Stromboli to 20 years in prison.
This will be your home, where I can find you always.
Our final Pinocchio villain is the Coachman. First up, he first offers and then partially forces Honest John and Gideon to bring him boys for Pleasure Island, which gets him a charge of criminal coercion. Then, when he rounds up the boys to go to Pleasure Island, that gets him multiple counts of kidnapping. Remember, these are minors, so they can't legally consent. With Pleasure Island, he is also guilty of running a theme park without a permit, and since he just lets the boys tear the place apart, including climbing on top of buildings, that's a charge of child endangerment. He lets them smoke cigars and drink booze on the island, which is a charge of distributing drugs and alcohol to minors. And when he prepares to sell the boys turned donkeys, that gets him a charge of child trafficking and slavery. And for that, I sentence the Coachman to the death penalty, with the execution manner being what he got in the Super Nintendo game, being kicked off a cliff and into the ocean. And our final film for today is Fantasia. So, let's head over to the concert hall and see what the Fantasia villains get. Starting with Zeus from the Pastoral Symphony segment, not to be confused with the Zeus from Hercules. His role in the segment is that he disrupts Bacchus's party and throws his lightning bolts at all the guests, especially Bacchus, just for kicks. That gets him charged with terrorism and disturbing the peace. With all that in mind, I sentence Zeus to 18 years in prison. And our final villain of the day, Chernabog. In the words of Wicked Binge, it's kind of hard to sentence him, given that he's basically Satan himself. But like Wicked Binge, I'm just going to charge him as a regular person. Okay? Like Wicked Binge says, Chernabog's actions of bringing back the dead and bringing them to Bald Mountain get him charged with necromancy. With all that in mind, I sentence Chernabog to life in prison with no parole. Well, that was it. My first episode of sentencing the Disney villains for their crimes. Before I go, I should note that I'll be doing 3 movies per session. And so, thanks for watching. Hope you liked it. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. In the meantime, court is officially adjourned.